Doing today?
Doing great, Pastor Keith. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm phenomenal. It's great here. We're about to get ready for our fair, so my kids getting ready for to present the 4-H fair. So we're excited,
That's always fun to go to and see all of their projects and animals. All that's awesome.
right? And if he wins, last week it got to show at the Iowa State Fair, which is a big deal here.
That is a big deal. That's great. I hope that
Uh,
happens again.
yeah, we're looking forward to it. So I love to ask my guests this question: what's the best piece of advice you ever received?
Well, let's see. This is not necessarily a direct piece of advice, but something that has really stuck with me since I was very little. It comes from my grandmother. And she would always say, take time to stop and smell the roses, which
Mm,
I know is not an original quote from her, but she attached to that somehow. And it impacted me as a child when I was with her. We would go slow. She was elderly, of course, even when I was very young. And so it stuck with me then, but now it has kind of come back up in my life as I have gotten into this field, how important it is to just take life slow sometimes and notice the details and appreciate the beauty of God's creation.
yeah, that is so critical because we can go through our entire life and it just goes by so fast. We don't remember anything because we never took the time to just stop and really appreciate the things that are around us, living in the moment.
Yes, yes, for sure.
So I'm curious too, and think about your life and your journey. Who are some people that served as a mentor or an inspiration for you along the way?
Thought about that, and I think there are, several people come to mind. One of the recent ones is a lady at my church. Her name is Penny, and my church did something really neat. Designed a mentorship program, but I loved the way they did it. They, had people sign up who wanted to be mentors and people who wanted to be mentored. And then they said, okay, what you're going to do is you're going to meet once a month for 3 months. Okay, so that was such a low commitment that hardly anyone could say no, right?
Right.
So many mentorship programs that are wonderful are very in depth. You meet once a week for 6 months, and that's a big time commitment. And if people can do that, I think that is fabulous. But I think that when you need to just kind of hook people in, the once a month for 3 months, and then Penny and I continued once a month for over a year. They said, you can do whatever you want to after that. And so she had a great impact on my life. She was someone who was recent, but I think about my mother and my grandmother and how they have impacted my life so deeply in my work now as well, but obviously in my personal life as well. They have been great mentors for me.
I love that. That's so cool. We had that idea when I was a pastor in Michigan. The problem was it was executed. You talk about execution. It wasn't executed properly. So they just kind of threw us out there and presented it to us at the conference. And they paired us up without ever talking to us or even getting our permission. So
Oh, okay.
the person who was my mentor didn't ever call me and we never had a connection. And it was like, I was like, oh, I was looking forward to it because he was a seasoned pastor. I'm like, I'd love to have a seasoned pastor kind of walk alongside and help me not make the mistakes I'm going to make, at
Right,
least
yeah.
minimize the ones I'm going to make probably.
Right. Yeah. I think, when churches can start mentorship programs, I think it's great. Or any organization starts a mentorship program. It could be about anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful.
So tell us about your background. Where did you become a certified life coach, especially specializing in digital addiction?
Well, my story starts before that. I first, actually, 14 years ago, became a licensed professional counselor, so a mental health counselor. So I've been doing that for a long time. And then what got me started in this was I wanted to pivot my practice to work more with families as a whole instead of working with individual adults or individual teenagers. And I would do a little bit of family work in there, but I wanted to do more direct family therapy. And as I got into that, planning that and learning more about that, I just realized more and more how battles over screen use were just a huge problem with families. So I thought, well, if I can focus on this specifically, maybe that could really help families in a big way. And so I got certified to treat digital addiction, and I also became a certified life coach. And that way, I can coach parents across the country.
All right, that's it. And it's what have you noticed about that field in terms of I know it's a lot of people have talked about. We have a pastor here in our area in Iowa who does stuff about screens for families and talk about how dangerous screens can be. What do you notice as you started working in this field as trends that are kind of you've uncovered?
Well, I think that some good things are happening and that more and more people are waking up to the fact that this is a big problem. It's not just kind of sucking away our time It's actually causing big problems in families. It's causing problems at school. It's causing physical health problems, mental health problems. And so that awareness of the problem is growing. That's great. I think my next big hurdle, or our next big hurdle, is that screen time and even young children having screen time has become such a norm so fast that now it's like, well, what do you do? How do you combat something that's already so ingrained as a norm, especially for younger people, that it's very difficult. When the iPhone came out, that was a status symbol for so many to say, I have an iPhone. And then, for your 10-year-old to have an iPhone, it was like, whoa, right? And so that piece of it, that was a little bit of it. And then you just go to the addictive properties. And once people started, it feels like you can't stop. And so people, not knowing that, we kind of got sucked in.
So you wrote a book about it. Tell us about that. Tell us the name of it and tell us kind of the format and what you hope to achieve through your book.
Well, my book is actually still in the works. It is in the editing process. And so I hope to have it out sometime this year.
All right.
But it is in the editing process. And actually, even the name has not been finalized, but it's going to be something about screen time solutions or solutions to screen time. And I talk about, overuse and addiction. And so what's going to be different about my book as opposed to other books that are out there, because there are a few other books out there already, is that my book really focuses on the solution part. I got frustrated early on in my certification and in the books that I read that they, very much detailed all of the problems that too much screen time is causing, that screen addiction is causing. And then the treatment or the solutions would be an afterthought at the very end, like just the very last chapter or the very last, 20 minutes of the training. And it was like, whoa, something needs to be done here. Someone needs to investigate this more as far as, what do we do other than just tell people, oh, stop using your screens too much, right? Because that's out there. That's a no-brainer, but it's hard because of the addictive properties, right? And so when I realized that after all of my, certifications, and I just read a lot of books, I said, well, what do we do to reverse some of this damage that screens are causing? And so I researched more and more and have pieced together what I see are the solutions to too much screen time. And so my book is about half of it is about the problems. So the first half is depressing and just awful, terrible. And then the second half is about the solutions.
My book is also just coming out like in this week or so. And I was curious, as you think about the research you did, what was some of the most interesting observations you got from the research you did in studying for this book, preparing this book?
Well, I think of two things. Number one, when I first started reading books, I assumed that they were written by psychiatrists and counselors, kind of people in my field, seeing the negative effects on people's mental health from too much screen time. But, one of the first books I got, I started reading it and I was like, wait a minute. And I discovered that the author was an occupational therapist. So she, had spent decades working in schools and is saying, hey, very recently with this new generation coming up, we're seeing problems as occupational therapists that we have not seen before. So to me, that was shocking. And I've seen, other types of health professionals who are alarmed about this. So it's not just the mental health aspect. I think people are familiar with, too much screen time is causing depression and anxiety and all of this family conflict, but they're not really focusing on, hey, this is a whole person, deal with it negatively affecting child development as well. So that was very surprising. And then just, I read so many terrible statistics about, again, the rise in anxiety and depression, and even the rise in child suicides, and that just shouldn't happen at all, right? But if we're seeing a huge increase, we're seeing for children ages 10 to 14, between the years 2007 and 2018, the suicide rate tripled.
Mhm.
Okay, and that is an emergency, right? That is an emergency, and we need to be looking at that. I'll share one more thing that I found. There was an article published by Politico magazine last year, and they conducted a survey of 1,400 mental health professionals like myself. And they asked them, what do they think is the cause of the steep rise in mental illness in children? And the number one cause listed by far above all the others was social media. So here we have, a large sample of people like me saying, hey, we're seeing these kids who are hurting and we're identifying the problem as social media. So those were some of the surprising things that I found.
I wanted you to kind of help us define the term digital addiction because we hear that term, but I don't think we really kind of grasp, what that term really unpacks. So kind of unpack that a little bit for us.
Well, I will give you some symptoms, but I'll also tell you that gaming disorder, because I focus on social media and video games, okay?
Mm,
And so there is gaming disorder is already listed in the ICD-11, which is the manual that primary care doctors use to diagnose all of the things that they can. And so I don't think people realize it's an actual diagnosis. And in the diagnostic manual that I use, it's not in there yet, but it is like in the current edition, it's in the back section to be moved forward next time. So I fully expect next time there to be a gaming disorder diagnosis and a social media disorder diagnosis as well. So there's that. But I would say, if you're looking for symptoms, that would be withdrawal from other people. Okay. You want to go to your room and be by yourself on your screen, right? Anger, especially when you try to get that child or teenager off their device. If they have some giant meltdown, that represents way too strong of an attachment to that device, right? These younger people, they're going to be missing communication skills. They're not going to be having the eye contact that they need to be having just because they're not practiced with human beings, right? Another one, this is one of the saddest, I think, is that, they're just not as happy as they used to be. You just see that zombie face, especially among younger people, and that is not normal. Okay. We don't need to just say, oh, that's the new generation coming up, whatever. That's not okay. Younger people, they're supposed to be the most vibrant and full of life and, carefree, right? That's like
right.
those of us who are older, we look back and say, man, that was the best time of my life as a child and as a teenager, and so much happiness and joy. But you just see them just that zombie face, and you're like, don't just chalk that up to a new generation being different. That's a warning sign of something's wrong, right? People will have fewer interests, and this would, be for adults as well. Once they get sucked into that screen, that, the addictive properties get that dopamine going in your brain. That's, it feels good, it makes you happy, all of those kinds of things. It gives you pleasure. And then the other things that you used to enjoy don't give you such a high dopamine spike. And so you're not interested in them anymore. So fewer interests. How about this one? You're exhausted, but you can't sleep. Right? We know
Mm,
how, too much screen time, you stay up until midnight, 2 a.m., 4 a.m. on that screen. So you're losing sleep hours, but you're also losing sleep quality. So exhausted, but even when you go to bed, you still can't sleep. That's another sign. Also, just a lack of motivation. That goes back to the dopamine. So when, especially with video gaming, you have a dopamine spike, and then it will actually plateau and stay at that high level. And then when you stop gaming, it goes back down. And then that can lead to dopamine depletion, which then, causes a whole host of problems, including the low motivation. They just don't have the get up and go that they need to be interested and to do things that they normally would do. Also, just being stressed or depressed with no other specific apparent reason that can be pointed to. Again, it goes back to the too much screen time. So those are some of the things that I am seeing and other professionals are seeing as far as symptoms.
So we talk about the screen. Is it also the content? What about the content that's contributing to this? Because we think about, well, if they're watching healthy stuff or if they're watching good stuff, it may be different. Is it also the content that they're being kind of fed on screen as well?
Well, sure, that has to be a part of it. I think that's, there's two parts. There's, the time and the actual screen itself, and then there's the content. So when you talk about content, for video games, that is desensitizing people to violence, right? And that is just not okay. It's, very clear. I I had a conversation with someone the other day. He is a doctor and he's also a former military, and I forget which branch of the military he was in. But anyway, he told me that not only does the military use video games to help desensitize their soldiers, which I had heard that before from other sources, they actually went to a game designer at a university in Michigan and said, would you design a game for us to help desensitize our new soldiers to killing? And so this game designer designed a game for the military and they took it and used it. But then he was like, okay, hey, let's market this to the public. And that is Call of Duty.
Oh my.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like here we have something designed for the military that our young kids are using, and that's not okay. So there's that type of content that's, not good. But then also you have, when you let your child and teenager have access to the internet, they're talking to people around the world with all different worldviews. Worked with a family before, and their teenagers were talking to strangers over video games, and their teenagers just did a 180 from what the parents had instilled in them and their Christian values, and they just did a 180, and the parents were like, we had no idea that this could happen. And they were like older teenagers. They weren't 12, 13. They were older teenagers when this happened. And so I express it this way, that, it's easy to say as a parent that, oh, I would not never let my child go spend the night at a stranger's house, right? If you don't know the people, you're not going over there to spend the night. But when your child or teenager has access to the internet in their bedrooms, that's like a virtual sleepover.
Yeah.
You have no idea who they're talking to, what kind of situation they're in, what kind of pressure they're feeling. We have, a rise in sextortion that is just really, teenagers are not prepared for that. Adults would not be prepared for it either, but especially teenagers and children have no idea what to do in that situation. And then that, we have teenagers, with self-harm and suicide over sextortion and all of these kinds of things. So the content and, you're just letting your child talk to strangers is not okay.
Yeah. So I love the fact that we've talked a lot about some of the challenges. You talk about and some key strategies you recommend to begin reversing the damage caused. So talk about some of the things you highlight in your upcoming book about how we can deal with some of this.
Yeah. So, the first step is to say, okay, you have to get away from the screen, but that's, not the whole thing, because people who just give that advice, it's like, well, that's part one, right? So then what do you do? Because especially, for adults or younger people, they spend so many hours on a screen, then it's like, okay, what do you replace that time with, right? And so one of the keys is to go outside more. Get outside in nature. The environment in nature generally, barring a hurricane or a tornado, is very calming. And so that, it being calming on our nervous system, I go back to thinking about, God created us in a garden, and we were there, and only in the last, I would say, 200 years have we started spending the majority of our time inside. And that has greatly increased, of course, over the last 50 years, and even more so now with screens. But, being outside, it's very calming and good for the nervous system. Also, it gives us a chance to experience awe. Okay, just to look at creation, and, that experience of awe is also very good for us, and just looking at the things that God created. I think sometimes when people think about awe, they think about the Grand Canyon or Niagara Falls, visiting those places. But I think that we need to develop a sense of awe when we see a flower or a butterfly or a shiny rock. And that takes me back to thinking about my grandmother, who said, slow down and smell the roses, right? Those were
Right.
ordinary, everyday life things to slow down and to be present. I want to back up here a little bit, talking about how nature can calm the nervous system. One of the very negative things that screens do is that screens put your brain into the fight or flight mode. And a lot of people don't realize that, but especially with gaming, people are having fun doing that. They feel excitement, they're enjoying it on the outside, but on the inside, their body is interpreting it as stress and real danger. And so then the body is producing cortisol, the stress hormone, and getting, all of those hormones going. And then we're kind of sitting in that for hours and hours, which is not good. I think that we've done very well in the health field explaining how chronic stress is leading to chronic diseases and all of these health problems. So now if we say, okay, screens are putting us in that chronic stress mode, we don't need that. And so again, going outside helps to get your body out of that fight or flight mode and into a calm and relaxed mode. And so being outside in nature is one of the keys. Also, face-to-face interactions with people. I mentioned, the lack of communication skills. Well, how you practice that, how you originally learn it is by talking and by hearing other people talk. And so it's not just the words, it's the body language, the facial expressions, the tone of voice, all of which is lost over a screen. And so face-to-face conversations with friends and family is another key. That's how we learn how to communicate, but it's also how we pass down stories and values, right? And that I think is unfortunately being lost a lot in this new generation. The morals and values aren't there like they used to be. And that's, we're seeing that with, random acts of violence by teenagers. And it's like, wait a minute, did they not get taught that this is not okay? Right? We're just seeing, I think, a rise in those kinds of incidents. So saying, morals and values have to be taught. And then the person can adopt them, and teaching people empathy, right? How to just try to imagine what it's like to walk in another person's shoes is so important in how we learn how to treat people with respect and kindness. And so again, interacting with people is how we do that.
I love.
There isn't really another way. Also, I mentioned a little bit earlier about sleep, making sure you get enough sleep. And so the screens, obviously the content kind of hooks us into just wanting to stay up later and later and later. But I think, one definite boundary would be don't have screens in the bedroom, right? That is just, they don't need to be there. The bedroom is for sleeping. Some younger people use the bedroom for studying, which they might need a screen for, but that again needs to be taken out when they're not using it for studying because, and same for adults as well. We don't need screens in our bedrooms. We need to sleep.
Right.
Because when everybody knows, however old you are or however young you are, if you don't get a good night's sleep, the next day you're grumpy. And so saying, it's, the content is exciting and will keep us up and we want that endless scroll, but also the blue light that comes from screens, that blue light going into your eyes and into your brain tells your body that it's daytime. So at midnight, your body will be producing daytime hormones, which it doesn't need to do. And that's why even after you shut your screen off, your body can't fall asleep because it's full of daytime hormones instead of being full of nighttime hormones. Our hormones, people talk about, oh, we need the correct hormone levels and all of this and make sure you're not low in this or that. And that's true. But we also need hormones to turn on and off at the appropriate time of day. And so if you are using a screen a lot at night, you're telling your body it's daytime and mixing it all up. And so making the steps to make sure you get enough sleep is critical for work, for school, for relationships, all of those. So making sure sleep is doing well. Physical movement is another key. We are way too sedentary. I sit and talk for a living, so I have to make sure that I get up and move around and walk and do physical exercise. So exercise and physical movement is necessary for any age, but I think a lot of people don't realize that for really young children, physical movement is essential for their development in other ways as well. When a child moves around and plays and jumps and hops and skips, that is developing their vestibular system, which is basically your inner ear and your balance, but that also controls your level of arousal. Okay, so if you don't have a well-developed vestibular system, you can't really control your level of arousal. So you might have a kid who's just really kind of wild and rowdy all the time, but that may be partially because their vestibular system isn't developed properly, or they may be too, low as far as their level of arousal too. And so there's that, and, just the brain development that needs to happen. I'll show you something here. This is a drawing, make sure it's on the screen here.
Yep. See it.
Cross section of a brain. And so what I was talking about earlier with video games especially, but also social media activating our fight or flight, that is in this part of the brain. This is your limbic system. This is where emotions are housed. Anger, anxiety, fear, all of those things light up this area of the brain. Okay. Now this area of your brain, which is your prefrontal cortex, and it's right behind your forehead, right here. This is the area of the brain that is responsible for higher level thinking, decision making, problem solving, but also things like, self-control and communication. So this is a very important part of your brain. This part of your brain is not fully developed until age 26.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's there and it's slowly developing, but it's not all the way done until age 26, which tells me that our environment, what we expose our brains to or not, helps to literally shape how the brain develops. And what you want also, with different parts of the brain controlling different functions, you want the parts of the brain to be also connected to each other. You want a well-integrated brain. Okay. And so if we don't have movement, if we don't have that face-to-face communication, all of those things, your brain isn't going to grow the neurons, the brain cells that connect these different parts, which again is going to affect their development. I mentioned the occupational therapists, they're seeing delays in reading and writing skills, and they are attributing that to the brain is less developed because these kids are just sitting and staring at a screen all day instead of moving and talking, all of those things. And so physical movement is another key. Like we've mentioned before, being in the present moment, being mindful is, we need to be in the present moment, be able to handle that. So many people today, when they actually try that and kind of practice it, some people actually start to get anxious when they sit there and just try to be quiet and still. And so if that happens to you, I can think that's another warning sign that you need to slow down and get away from too much stimulation. Where I used to, stimulation and all of these notification dings, and it's just all the time new things coming up that we feel anxious when we're still and quiet. But we
Right.
need that still and quiet for our brain to rest and to be able to process. Our brains need to process things. And that's another reason why we can't sleep at night, is because if we're not taking the time to slow down and process during the day, our brains will process at night. We crawl in the bed and the brain's like, okay, we don't have to pay attention to our external environment. So now we can pay attention to our internal environment and do all this processing. So you lay there and you're sleepy, but your brain is wide awake and it's just running with all of these random thoughts, right? It just runs. It's like your brain just turns on. So when we take the time to be still and process during the daytime, then our brains can rest at night. So that's another key about sleep, is you need to process during the day or before you go to bed, and then you lay down and your brain can be quiet.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah. So, and then go ahead.
No, I'm just curious, as I hear you talk about this, I'm sure in your research you kind of have a percentage of how many young people you think are impacted by this digital addiction.
I don't focus on that as much as you would think. I would think that
Mm.
there are many, many, many who would qualify as being addicted. I think, a couple more things about addiction. I would say, if you're doing something which we would call a behavioral addiction, there are, substance addictions, and then there are behavioral addictions. And so screen time would be a behavioral addiction. If you are engaged in something and you stop it and you're having trouble stopping it, or you have any kind of symptoms that come up, those are withdrawal symptoms. And that's a signal that, hey, I'm too attached to this thing. And then also, when this thing, whatever it is causing problems in other areas of your life, that means it's too much, right? And so there's addiction, but then also I think that almost all of us would fall under the category of overuse, right?
Right.
And so even overuse is going to have a lot of these same negative effects. It might be to a little bit of a lesser degree, but it's still negative. And so I actually don't focus as much on those types of things as you would think, but I would just say we all need to greatly reduce is my focus. So
I would agree with that.
so you don't, and some people, we don't want to call it addiction. We don't want to admit we're addicted, but okay, you don't have to. We overuse, or let's start there and help ourselves.
Right. So as you think about, where do you see this going for you in the future in terms of how do you expand the work you've already started?
Well, I'm looking forward to my book coming out, hopefully sometime this year. I think that will create some great opportunities for me. And I just, I want to help families. I want to see them become more peaceful and see, all of this arguing and conflict going down. I want to see family relationships to grow. And I think that, parents are in a lot of pain these days. They've, many great parents have tried to reduce screen time in their homes and have unfortunately given up, because just those big fights happen and they're like, okay, for the sake of peace, I'll let my child have this device, or whatever. And so, like, I understand wanting peace, but let's get peace in the right way. And I think that that's where I can come in as a coach and say, let me help you from the front end to prepare for this and to get you ready, and let me kind of be the bad guy, right? Because if I'm coming in and saying, okay, let me kind of give you some instructions, it's the instructions from the coach and not from the parent, because, it's hard to be the bad guy as the parent. But if somebody else can be the bad guy and then the parent is just kind of implementing what the bad guy says, that can help the relationship between the parents and the children to survive this rocky space, so to speak. And so I just want to see families and relationships thrive.
So as a coach, if you have a child that's dealing with this kind of an issue, what would be a good starting point, you think, to begin having this conversation?
Another piece that I think parents are missing is that we need to talk about how screen time affects the brain. And we need to talk about brain health and explain some of these things. You can explain this, on a very basic level to teenagers and even to children and say, if you want to have a sharp brain, which I think most young people do, they want that brain to be sharp, to be able to get ahead and to do the things in life that they want to do, then okay, here are the things that are healthier for the brain and here are the things that are not so healthy. So if we can take that approach and get them excited about brain health and their own desires for their life, that is a much more positive approach than the approach of, hey, we're going to take away your screens and take away all your fun, right? And so I think that starting there is a better way to start than just saying, taking away the screen.
Right. No, that's good. I love to ask my guests this question. This is my favorite question. What do you want your legacy to be?
I think I just have to go back to seeing families thrive and watching relationships grow. I think that, parent-child relationships are a key to passing down good morals, good values, Christian faith, and just having not only a wonderful individual that you've raised, but that turns into a wonderful society for us to be in. And I think, I just look around and see so many relationships suffering that if I can be a part of keeping relationships and keeping families together and helping people to, again, have a healthy brain. Because if you don't have a healthy brain, you're going to struggle. You're not going to have the skills that you need for whatever it is you want to do in life. And so I want, people to have seen that, hey, she impacted so many families for good.
That's great. So a new thing I'm going to do season 6 is we have a surprise question. So pick a number between 1 and 4 for your surprise question.
I'm going to pick number 3.
All right. So your surprise question is, I like this. What do you consider your greatest achievement?
Well, the book isn't done yet, so I can't necessarily say that. Let's see, I think here it is I started my own business. When I became a counselor, I obviously worked for other people, businesses, agencies, things like that. And then almost 8 years ago now, I started my own practice. And so I'm self-employed as a counselor and a coach. And that was huge for me. It was what I really wanted to do, and I'm able to do it. And so I'm very blessed in that way, but I'm very proud that I'm able to do this.
That's great. As we wrap up this great conversation, what do you want to leave with the audience as a key takeaway from our conversation?
Well, I think in a lot of these conversations, we talk about, depressing, disturbing things, about how screens damage us, all of these things. I just want to leave people with hope. I know some people are very discouraged about this whole scenario in their individual lives and in our, society as a whole. But I say, there's hope. I think that we can turn things around and create a healthy relationship with screens. I think that I want people to be able to talk about it, not just talk about the problems, but say, how can we kind of, band together? Can we get 2 or 3 families together to say, we're going to get together face to face and do activities and go to the park, and just, it has to start small, but it has to start somewhere. And just to say, there's hope. I want to be a hope giver in my counseling practice and my coaching practice, to say, don't give up. It's okay to try again. It's okay to try a third time.
So where can people find you, and where can they find it when your book is out to connect with that eventually?
So people can find me at my website, which is lifewalkcoaching.com. It's WALK. So lifewalkcoaching.com is my website. Also, if people have questions, want to know more about what I do, my phone number is 501-290-7132. So just give me a call and see how I might be able to help. And then my book, again, I will have a link to the book on my website when it comes out. And so I think that would be the easiest way for people to find it. So something about solutions to screen time or screen time solutions, but I will definitely have it on my website. The link to the Amazon. It will be on Amazon, but I will link to it on my website.
Well, Mary, thanks so much for taking the time and tackling this really important topic, and not just tackling it, but giving people solutions. We can always identify the problems, but it's good to have some practical tips and steps we can take to kind of address that issue. So we kind of thank you for helping parents have some tools and resources to help their kids be more healthy and have a healthier brain as we begin to move our generation forward.
Thank you so much for having me on, Pastor Keith. This has been great. I've loved speaking with you and sharing with your listeners. This has been great.
Well, thank you. Blessings.
Blessings to you.